Howdy everyone. Continuing their trend of choosing interesting characters to make action figures out of, Jakks Pacific has recently released Big the Cat in their 4-inch line of Sonic the Hedgehog figures. He's a part of Wave 11, alongside Chaos Zero and re-releases of Sonic and Knuckles. Fresh out of the box, you can see he's easily one of the largest characters Jakks has made so far. Like some of the other characters Jakks has made in this scale, his size, relative to the other members of the Sonic cast, has been impacted by the need for him to fit in the uniform packaging of 4-inch figures. Generally, Big would be quite a bit taller than Sonic, but here Sonic is very nearly Big's height. Unless Jakks wanted to create a new line of 4-inch playsets that would allow for larger characters and bigger packaging, scaling issues like this are totally unavoidable, so I get it. Moving past his scale though, it must be said that for the $10 price point he feels quality. He's got some real weight to him, with his body being totally solid, not hollow plastic. He's also got 12 points of articulation, which is comparable to the amount of articulation points on Jakks' other Sonic figures. However, where he's articulated matters. He's got elbow joints! This is a rarity for Jakks Sonic figures, who tend to have their elbow joints set in a sort of all-purpose bend pose, with no articulation. My assumption here is that Jakks believes elbow joints would impact the look of the figures negatively, so they save elbow articulation for the larger characters, and characters who have features which can disguise the elbow articulation entirely. Whatever the reason for it, they've done a great job of it here with Big. Looking closely, you can see that they intentionally hid the hinge joint in his arm by placing it underneath one of his stripes, which looks very natural. For comparison, we can look at the previously released Big the Cat figure by Jazwares. Here, the hinge joint was placed directly over this same stripe, leading it to stand out a lot. While we're on the topic of this old Jazwares figure, we can see several other improvements made to this modern Big figure. Look at the shoulders. On Jazwares, the hinge joints of his shoulders protrude from his torso, making him look a bit more swole and gangly than he really should, to be honest. On the new figure, his shoulder joints are depressed into the torso, which looks much more on model. One detail these two figures share, but in different ways, is how they were impacted by the constraints of their packaging. We've already discussed the scaling issues with Jakks' interpretation of Big, but although the Jazwares figure was scaled correctly relative to the other figures in his line, it suffered from a different issue: his ears. Take a look at any artwork or model of Big and you'll note that his ears aren't really supposed to be flattened as they are here, with them usually looking a bit more perky. It makes him look a little sad, honestly. I assume this happened because of the aforementioned packaging constraints. Big's head practically touches the ceiling in the box, even with his ears down. They had the choice to either compromise the scale of the figure or change something about the sculpt, and in this instance, they went with the latter. With this in mind though, we can see one more notable compromise on the Jakks figure that the Jazwares one didn't have to deal with: the tail. Very similar to Jakks' previously released Vector figure, Big's tail has had to be practically pressing against his body in order to fit into the packaging. For comparison, you can see how it would have looked with more freedom on the Jazwares figure. I'd also like to note the significant improvement to the sculpt of Big's belt on the Jakks figure. On the Jazwares figure, much of the detailing was practically flat, while on Jakks, the belt buckle and end of the belt are much more three-dimensional. However, if we're nitpicking, it isn't perfect either. You should be able to see the white fur on Big's belly through the notches on the belt, which are painted the same color as the belt here. So now let's talk about Big's face. I thought at first that his face here was spot on with that lovable 1,000-yard stare, but I think Jakks may have gotten one particular detail wrong: the markings around his eyes. Looking at artwork of Big, as well as some of his in-game models, it seems that those markings are intended to be more of a unique shape than they're depicted here on the figure, something we can also see on the Jazwares figure. On the Jakks figure, these markings are just simple ovals. However, I admit, I feel a little bit conflicted about this, as depending on which artwork you're referencing, or even which model, these markings rarely seem to be exactly the same. Nonetheless, I feel like it was worth mentioning, though I don't think it greatly impacts the look of the figure either. Now before we close out, I'd also like to discuss the included accessories, or rather, the lack thereof. Big, again, probably as a consequence of his size and packaging restrictions, comes with only 2 rings, which is kind of disappointing, to be honest with you. Big, similar to other characters such as Amy and Egg Robo, has a very obvious accessory that he should come with, maybe even 2! Of course, I'm referring to his best friend Froggy, along with his fishing pole. Every single other big action figure in the past, from Resource to Toy Island to Jazwares, has included either a fishing pole or Froggy, or even both. So for Jakks, which has, in my opinion, made the best Big figure to date, to not include one of these is a little sad. Perhaps they are considering including Froggy in the 2.5-inch figure line, rather than squeezing him into the role of an accessory? But I won't exactly hold out hope for that. But this is the same company that thinks Rhinobot is marketable enough to get a figure, so it's possible! All that said, this is one of my favorite figures that Jakks has done so far. Although I have my nitpicks, it's truly hard to complain when a figure of this quality costs just $10. He's about as perfect as I could possibly hope for a price like that. If you get lucky and manage to find him around at your local Target or Walmart, I really can't recommend him enough. Just don't give your business to those scalpers charging upwards of $30 for the guy on eBay and Amazon. Thanks for watching!